Welcome to Retailistic, the official podcast of Coresight Research for December 16th, 2025. This week, CEO Deborah Weinswig welcomes another legend of commerce, Todd Benson. Todd grew the Citigroup private equity fund to $11 billion before leaving to start his own firm, Harrington LLC. But before we chat with Todd about the impact of AI on our future, Isla is here from our London office with a preview of this week's research, publishing on Coresight.com.
This week, we're rolling out our 2026 Sector Outlook data graphics. A full week of clear, one-page snapshots with forward-looking insights across a wide range of US retail sectors. 10 quick visuals packed with what you need to know going into 2026. We'll also share our November US retail sales update, breaking down what the latest numbers tell us about consumer spending. And we'll wrap up our third quarter earnings season with a look at how US retailers performed and what it signals for the months ahead. Focused insights, clear takeaways, all coming this week.
Thanks, Isla. Now here's Deborah and Todd.
Todd, thanks so much for joining us on Retailistic. We're so honored to have you with us. And so I think, my gosh, we must have met over a decade ago.
Yeah.
And I think we were originally talking real estate stuff, and just having come off of 2 days of ICSC, it's a wonderful time to be able to reconnect. I always find that you are seeing things probably 3 to 5 years earlier than most. Maybe we can start there with what your process is, or how do you put yourself physically in places where you're able to connect dots in a way that 99% of people can't.
Well, I don't know about that. Some of it's basically just like luck. And I truly believe that sometimes it's sort of kind of just like luck, and being one who has no children. Golf, I love golf more than golf loves me. And so that I basically spend, like you, a lot of time just working and reading and consuming just any sort of information that I can sort of kind of find, and try to fashion myself a little bit as a human marketplace for intellectual and financial capital. So things just kind of wash over me. You can learn a lot just by observing. And I think actually when I'm with young people, I always sort of say, like, the skill that we all want to kind of learn and to continue to hone and to build, two things are, one of which is basically what I call second order thinking. And so basically just when you see anything, so try to always kind of force yourself to ask the question, what does this mean? What's sort of kind of happening next? And particularly at times of dislocation, or change. So you see, for example, ChatGPT coming out and being one of the fastest adopted, kind of consumer, kind of products. And you sort of say to yourself, well, what does that, but you have to force yourself to ask the next question. Well, who wins, or who wins and who loses in that world? And of course, the answer for all of us, and kind of shame on me for not buying more NVIDIA stock now 2-3 years ago, or you see interest rates rising very rapidly, go to that shock, and you don't say to yourself, gee, what's basically a levered long fixed income ETF? Oh, I know, it's a bank. And go out and you short Signature and First Republic Bank. And so just things like that, always sort of kind of thinking about, kind of second order impacts. And then the second thing is, I always say basically is just like try to figure out how to ask better questions, and to sort of just, if you can kind of constantly teach yourself what's the right question, the right person at the right time, the universe will sort of speak it back to you. So, and sometimes too, I also think it's, I was thinking this morning about, here's a crazy stat, which is like 29% in terms of, so think about it this way. There's 340 million Americans, 170 million of them are men. Of the 170 million Americans that are men, 780 of them have what it takes to make the 26-man roster in Major League Baseball. So we've whittled down that universe from there to all the way there. Of those 780 men, 100 best of those basically make 29% of all salaries paid in Major League Baseball. I'm sorry, I think that's the top. Yeah, that's the top 50. 50 of them make 29% of it, and 100 of them, the top 100 of them, out of 780 in a census of 170 million men, make 48 or 49% of it. It's just some of those sort of, you sort of kind of just say, kind of like everything has a Pareto distribution in terms of outcome, and we're in such a world of winner take all, and so I think that applies to sort of everything.
And it's so funny because I've never said, right, be a fast follower, right? Being first tends to cost a lot more time, money, effort. But now, I mean, it's interesting. Our team was just on the phone with a large retailer, and we're hosting these AI playbook events, which are public for different retailers, so that Wall Street, right, we'll call it the media, and even people internally understand what they're doing from an AI perspective, because more and more their share price is based on that. And it's amazing. I go back to, I think it was 2013. I'm sitting in the audience at the June shareholders meeting for Walmart, and Doug McMillon talks about, we're going to be a tech company. And all of us are kind of looking at each other, right? Like almost uncomfortable physically, because that was just kind of like lunacy. And look at like where they've gone, right? In a very short period of time. And that's, I think, there's the speed component, there's being first. And then there's also, I mean, to get to where they are, I mean, it was expensive and difficult. And so I think right now too, doing like the hard things is what's going to get you ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. No. Yeah, Walmart, I think Walmart's incredibly well positioned right now. I mean, basically, like, they're phenomenally well positioned.
It's interesting. We did this somewhat macro-y presentation yesterday to NACDS, and then somewhat on like AI. So it was like, we talked about the macro, and then like the macro impact of AI, and then like AI, just to kind of build a bridge. And what is, as you start to like kind of take a big step back and you look at, right, and I mean, Costco is about as quiet as you can get. And you look at like how much market share they have now. And right, they've just really put in like a more strategic insights team like the last 2 years. So they've gotten here just doing good retail, right? Walmart, I think the story going kind of forward, right, is this like ecosystem partner player and alternative revenue sources that they're still very early in. But the biggest thing is, right, that 100,000 plus household income consumer where they're winning. And I don't know, I mean, I do know when I go into Target or when I think about it, or you're on the earnings calls, like I know what's wrong, but I still personally don't believe the changes that they've made are going to get them where they need to. And you've also had Kroger. I mean, it's interesting, right? Think about this, Todd. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for today. And I'd love to hear your take. And maybe it doesn't relate to anything at all, and maybe it does. Maybe there's more correlation. But look at Target, Kroger, and Starbucks, who I would say probably all go after a fairly similar consumer, all struggling with the strategy, right? Basic strategy. And I mean, I know a bunch of people who work at Starbucks, and it's like, oh, we stopped writing people's names on the cups. I'm like, I guarantee you that has nothing to do with like you saying, hello, Deborah, thank you for buying the coffee today. That's not it. But like, I have a Starbucks a block and a half. I used to go all the time. I mean, honestly, I'm embarrassed to say I can't tell you the last time I've been.
No, I think Starbucks is interesting because I think they got, did you ever, this guy, the guy, Dean Phillips, was it Dean Phillips? The guy that ran for basically the Democratic presidential, the congressperson who ran for that. And basically they made their money in Belvedere vodka, and they made their money in Talenti ice cream. And that's how the family made its money. And so basically Belvedere vodka was taking Grey Goose and Kettle One and basically just going a little bit more premium, a little bit in terms of the vodka, and a little bit more premium in terms of the bottle. And Talenti is it related to Haagen-Dazs and Ben and Jerry's on ice cream. And that's why they made his money. And I think basically that's what's happened to Starbucks. They got kind of a little bit stuck in the middle. They got picked apart by Blue Bottle and some of these people going basically kind of better, more premium. And they got picked apart from the bottom with people that had cheaper real estate strategies, and the Luckin and the Bank Street and those. And so they're in a tough kind of place.
So I just got back from China 2 days ago. So I've spent a lot of time there, and I still spend a lot of time there. And I mean, I remember, right, Starbucks doing in Shanghai, right, the tour of their roastery and like patting themselves on the back and stuff. And I'm like, this is great. All I can see is like how much it costs you to build this, and how you're not going to be able to charge the same amount as like Costa Coffee or Luckin or whatnot. And I don't think ultimately consumers are that different around the world, right? I always said one of the reasons until the department stores figured this out, I'd be in line behind somebody who had like the Macy's credit card and I'd have like a clipped coupon.
Yeah.
That person was literally saving 40 to 60% more than I am because I don't have a Macy's credit card. So I would call it like the chump factor, because now I feel like a chump, right?
Yeah.
I'm here. I've spent my time, but I'm having to pay for basically the same good this much more. So if you think about like Luckin, Costa versus Starbucks, I go to Luckin, I feel like brilliant. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm like, I like have phone will travel, right? And it's so funny because I'm there and right, everyone, the first time there, you can see the people who've never been there before. They like are like deer in the headlights. How do I order? And I'm like, no, it's all on your phone. They're like, but what do I do on my phone? I'm like, well, you download the Luckin app and you order your coffee. That's what you do. And they're like, well, what about talking to a person? I'm like, no, that's how you order your coffee. But then what's so amazing, right? Because you're now connected. They know what coffee. you get like, so let's say your coffee is $2.54. You then get like a $2 coupon like instantly. So now you're like, oh, I'm so smart, right? Like not only did I figure out how to like order, coffee's pretty good. And now I have a $2. I mean, it's basically like a bounce back.
Yeah.
But I want to take a pause because this thread I think is super important is like modern day, right? Remember like green stamps or whatever, like,
Yeah.
in Hong Kong at Circle K, we had developed this thing called Stamp It, right? But they were digital stamps. I think that I'm hearing more and more and more, right? People talking about that. I was at this dinner last night and someone was like, I didn't even know this, like Macy's, I guess, way before my time used to do that. And they're like, wouldn't that be cool if they did that? I'm like, yeah, we need like a modern day loyalty. It's not like a loyalty card and you buy, I'm not calling out anyone in particular, but if you know, you know, like if you buy 5 bras, you get your 6 free. That is not like loyalty. That is not gamification. That's not interesting. If you make it interesting for the customer and they care, they will follow through and you will gain share. And I think Walmart Plus, I think was brilliant going against the grain, right? Of what they always believed. I remember talking to Mike Duke and Lee Scott and whatnot about like loyalty programs. And they're like, no, they're like, Mr. Sam said we shouldn't do one. And then like, Doug is like, that was a different time. This is this time. We need to do this. And it's been unbelievable.
Yeah. No, and just all the data, the retail media, just like everything sort of compounds. It's interesting you would just mention Luckin Coffee. I've tried to remember. It has been one that I haven't followed the stock since, but I just remember like they had the fraud or, whatever they had. And I was thinking like how many companies have actually had like massive fraud where they almost went out of business and have come back to be this strong? They
So it's
may
very
be I don't know of anybody other than the like Luckin that's been able to do it. It's like I'll call it the Lazarus. How many Lazaruses are there? There are Lazaruses in terms of, maybe Chili's in terms of the restaurant world, in terms of just like killing it. But they weren't. That wasn't a fraud. That was basically just they lost their way and they were able to kind of turn it around. But
not many.
well, right. I mean, there's more examples of like Lacoste, right? Lacoste basically they took the shirts out of the store; it was too cheap, and they turned it around, and now Lacoste came back as a premium good, but not not in terms of fraud.
Well,
Basically, whatever it was.
look at T-Mobile, right? They had major cyber issues before others did. So I think that was, they were lucky, I guess, in an odd way that it happened first to them. So they completely, like 3 years ago, I mean, this is recent, right? This is like post-COVID. They went in and they completely, like to get onto one of their calls, you have to type in like 8 letters. Right. It is like when I'm telling you and everything is like locked down, right? I'm on an airplane sitting next to somebody who works there and it's like their whole laptop is like locked down. And so I think, first of all, it's like, yes, we had a problem. We're not going to run away from it. And as a result, we can now help you understand what you should do to protect yourselves. And so if you look at it, right, I won't name them, but right, their competitors have had some major issues, right, in terms of data breaches and et cetera. And T-Mobile has been this kind of like stalwart. So if you can, I mean, we've known each other a long time, Todd, right? I'm one of those people, right? If I miss an opportunity, if I make a mistake, right, I own it. But I also really like constructive feedback because I just want to get better at what I'm doing. It's really important to me. And it's not about necessarily being the best. I just want to continuously improve because I don't, first of all, whatever the best is, that target keeps moving. I feel like you're similarly minded.
Yeah. Of course, it also kind of illustrates one of my things in life that basically the happiness, in order to be happy in life, you got to break the 2X mentality. And I call it the 2X mentality is basically if I had twice as much status, money, success, whatever thing that is basically. And so like, just, you constantly, like the bar constantly moves. And so like, if you truly want to be happy in life, you got to break that. You got to just say like, you know what, the concept of enough, of enough.
It's funny you say that. So my brother was changing jobs and as the, kind of big sister, right? Like always. And so I said to him, I'm like, we were just talking salary and all that. And so, he's a CFO. So of course he just puts it in dollar and cents. He's like, unless I'm literally making 10X as much, it just isn't going to change my life. Right. And it was such an like very pragmatic, right? Don't like nickel and dime because it just doesn't really matter unless like my salary is 10X. It's like, he's like, it's just not going to change my day-to-day life. And so I think sometimes too, the 2X versus 10X, right? I mean, I think that to be happy, we were talking about before the call, right? Like a really good night's sleep can make you, right? It's sometimes like the really small things. It's never like the really big things.
No.
Yeah, it's interesting. And actually it's funny. So I was just going back to, I just got back from China 2 days ago. I met somebody who, started working there like 15 years ago. And he is from the US, from the Midwest. And he said on one of the first, he works in med tech. He said on one of the first days, his boss said, there's no such thing as 2 weeks. And this guy's name is Mike. He's like looking, he's like, didn't even know what that meant. He's like, there's only 2 days. He's like, you never tell me you're getting me something in 2 weeks because here we can do it in 2 days. And I thought that was such great way to describe China's speed. And if that's what's expected, and you think about leaning into that, right? I think sometimes going back to happiness, and this is why I bring it up, is that it's wherever the bar is and how you feel like you want to be at the bar, under the bar, over the bar, or striving kind of. And I think it goes back to kind of what expectations are. So sometimes happiness, I think, can be geographically based as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, it's, I think there's this expression, we all become the arithmetic average of the 5 people we spend the most time with in whatever it is, ambition, happiness, whatever it is. So basically choose your friends aspirationally. But yeah, that definitely holds. It definitely holds. But let me ask you this, since you just got back from China, it's remarkable to me basically just how all the tariff, volatility is seemingly not been as bad as I would have thought. I would have thought that, and maybe it had, maybe I'm just missing it, but or maybe it hasn't come through the numbers as people were kind of running through inventory. But it seems to me that like the world has navigated tariffs better than I would have thought it would have been, colossally bad. And maybe it's only just bad. I don't know.
It's really only been in footwear. So if you think about it, in footwear, there's a lot of capital equipment. You're talking about molds and right. So for anyone who's been through a factory, and I'm sure you can go look it up on YouTube and see what that's like. But like in an apparel factory, right, you literally have like a sewing machine. Sewing machine, put it in your suitcase, have sewing machine, will travel. So I think that what we've seen is that our friends in footwear have been hit much harder. And it's been much more difficult because you can't also easily move production. So they've just figured out kind of how to stay put, which I actually think has been, we got a lot of our clients, not our advice, right? Moved out of China, then realized what they gave up, moved back to China. Some cases, they moved a little bit of production out of China. So there's been a lot of this. But if you just stayed and focused and built a strategy, you would have been much better off.
Yeah.
And so, well, look at what's happening. Li Ning, Anta, right? They're acquiring, brands outside of China in the athletic footwear space, right? And so I think if you are there, I think you've figured out how to navigate. And I think this is, a lot of companies kind of pulling their teams into Vietnam or Cambodia or Indonesia or whatever. I think that they ended up hurting themselves because they didn't work collectively together to figure out how to do things better, faster, cheaper. They just physically moved. And so I think to be honest, I think they did themselves a disservice. And I do know that many of our clients who had moved out are moving back. Because, if you think about cargo, fabric, talent, proximity, it's all there. And actually, I don't know if you saw my LinkedIn post. Oh my gosh, it was like, it was, we should go together or I'll take a better video next time. So I went for a wedding, and of course I stayed and worked. And I've always wanted to, so I've been very involved in something called like Science Park in Hong Kong, RITA. And this is a lot of the research, right, that, is done in Hong Kong. And so they've built in like the last years this whole advanced manufacturing center. And they have one of the areas devoted to the apparel world. So they're growing hydroponic cotton in like a warehouse, and they can do two a year, right? Because it's got like about a 6-month. And then what they're also doing is, this is the thing that was like so unbelievable. So, right, when people say like their garments are recyclable, but they're like poly cotton, they are not recyclable because you can't break down poly and cotton in the same garment, right? So yes, maybe, so however, they're not recyclable how I would define recycling. So they've literally been able to, so you had to have, right, like advanced AI. They can now physically look at a garment and see the fibers and figure out, is it, let's call it 95 cotton, 3 poly, 2 elastane, whatever. And they can break those fibers down back into the original fiber. And the cotton ends up being like almost like sand, like chalky.
Yeah.
And then the polyester goes into like strips. And so you can like like basically reconstitute. You put water in the stand, it becomes cotton again. I mean, it is truly unbelievable. And what I learned, which I always had kind of thought, I was never a big believer, more just gut than anything, that you couldn't turn plastic bottles into tennis shoes. Not calling on any particular brand or anything, but we'll leave brands out of this. But if you then recycle again, it is unusable. So as they said, plastic bottles should only be plastic bottles.
Right.
So that was interesting. Secondly, the fact that you can now do this, right? And you're actually saving money. And I always believed, actually, Richard Galante, former CFO of Costco, he's like, sustainability rhymes with profitability. Well, it doesn't exactly rhyme, but right, if you get the point, you have to do things for the right reasons. Ultimately, if you're a publicly traded company, you need to, right, your shareholder has to be, top of mind in terms of what you do. So this is actually saving money, time, driving ROI and ROIC, and it's one of those things, and you can do it in your warehouse. You're also talking about like a much more stable cotton crop, right? You're starting to like really. I mean, Todd, a year ago this couldn't be done. This is like, and the thing is like so easy. Going back to like you can feel it. It's like in the physical world to me, I feel like where we're seeing leaps and jumps in with AI or as a result of AI, I'm much more impressed with that than the fact that I can like now edit something I write with a Coresight GPT that we built, right? Like that's sure, like, that's interesting. I had a person who did that before. Now we have this like GPT and the person gets to do, kind of different work. But when we're solving like real world problems, I don't know. That to
Yeah.
me is where, and
Fascinating.
so,
Don't have to worry about traceability and the Uyghurs being involved in any of those sorts of things either.
I mean, it's a totally different like approach. So if we think about that, right, like this idea that from a tech perspective, there's what you can see, but most of it right now you can't. How do you think about where to invest, how to invest? How do you look at results? Because so much of it it's like AI magic.
Yeah, I think that's the honest answer is it's very hard. I mean, in the venture world, people kind of think about three things, one of which is basically insight. So basically, where's the white space or what's the big idea? The second thing is basically inflection point. So like kind of why now? Because it turns out that kind of, most companies are not, or most ideas are not bad ideas, they're just kind of bad timing. Webvan was a bad idea in 2000, but when it was reconstituted, was DoorDash or Instacart or any of these others, it became a great idea because just time it's kind of.
We were the bankers on Webvan. I knew Webvan. I can't believe you brought that up. I could give the tour. Truly, I was like able to give the tour of their, kind of DC. And like, this was like the thing. And I was like, I always, it was like you'd ask these questions as an analyst and like they would kind of, I'm like, for your model to work, you have to do 6 deliveries in an hour. And right, if you remember, right, you had to unpack the totes.
Yeah.
Right, they had plastic totes, and they literally would have like dog bones in their pocket to give, and like they would have like lollipops. I'm like, you cannot do like 1-to-1 customer service in 10 minutes unless it's all in the same apartment building, which is not how San Francisco is built, right? Which is their first market. So it's so funny that you brought that up, and reconstitute DoorDash.
Right. Or Cosmo, right? Cosmo, where you'd like order just one.
I love Cosmo. Oh my
then
God.
it becomes GoPuff, and GoPuff
favorites.
works. Anyway, so like, so that's inside inflection point, and then basically why this team, right? So that's those sorts of things. And they think basically in terms of AI, things that are going to work in AI are going to be basically, they say kind of proprietary data sets or proprietary data. Then it's workflows, basically just kind of people, kind of just getting accustomed to it. And that's, kind of gets into the routine. And then the last thing are basically distribution advantages. And so like those are the ways that at least the frameworks that kind of a lot of people kind of look through, kind of for AI, but in terms of thinking about, just like where, and I do think to your point around kind of first movers, I mean, some of these things that have been first movers and things which you would otherwise thought is relatively commoditized. Or was this Harvey I just read, Dutch Finance, which is like the AI legal one of the leaders in doing that. And I think it was, I don't know, it was a $5-6-7 billion valuation, but these things are getting to be kind of relatively sizable because somebody has a little bit of a first mover advantage. And at least for now, that's giving them opportunities to compound that advantage. But, the one company that one of the things that and the other thing too is like in this world too, like sometimes you just sort of say like, I'm going to invest in something totally different. So this year I've invested in just things that have been a little bit more off the run versus more of the kind of the B2B software things I've invested in, like Grata, which we sold to DataSite about a year ago. Have been things like Slate, which is a protein shake. All right. And so protein is having a moment and kind of Slate's, kind of businesses, more than doubled this year in terms of revenue, just because, kind of protein shakes are very hot. Put money into one of the franchisees for 7 Brew Coffee. We were talking about coffee earlier. but, kind of just, drive through coffee. If you think about just sort of the efficiency of the model, we just have like a kiosk and people going through from some, sugary and highly caffeinated sort of kind of drinks. What else?
What do you think about the whole like I remember meeting Peter Pham and him telling me about liquid death, and I was like, because he's like, I'm like, so I'm gonna go to a stadium and I'm gonna get a can of water, right, with a skull on it,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna be cool. I'm like, great. I'm like, like, and it was funny. I was just with their CMO who's like phenomenal, and like I think they still pinch themselves at like what what they've done for the water category in particular, but B, just kind of like the growth that they've had, but like that alternative. I mean, if you think about it, right, some of the greatest changes are, right, we're seeing a significant decline in people drinking,
Yeah.
right? And so where certainly some of that's going into like the Celsiuses and whatnot of the world, but like where do you see kind of like the alternative beverage market, or how far do you take that?
I don't know, but it's basically by like, if you can think of a beverage, a good friend of mine recently retired as the COO of a major grocer. And he basically said, just Todd, let's think up of a beverage because that's a pretty good way to get rich. This is the time of like when Alani Nu got sold for like $1.6 billion or something out of it, like nowhere. Or, think about vitamin water, Olipop and Poppy and just, kind of and beverage.
It's like mind boggling.
But it does come down to kind of something somebody observed to me is like when you meet like particularly a lot of these Latin American and European sort of you're on G7 for some of these families that have been wealthy over 7 generations. That's relatively infrequent because basically from generation to generation, you either have even Sears and General Motors, which were dominant when I was a young child, or one's hobbled and the other one doesn't exist. Thing that can sustain over 7 generations besides real estate, where you've got locational advantage, and doesn't matter if your grandfather was a drunk and your father wasn't that smart. Basically, like that value will sort of endure because of the building endures. But the one industry and company that would be beer, and beer is something if you think about particularly Latin American, European beer have sort of kind of persisted generation over generation. You find some of these things that are just 150-year-old brands, which is sort of interesting with your comment about, kind of beverages and drinks and it goes to things around kind of habit. I mean, things that are habitual.
If chocolate, like I was just thinking about,
Yeah.
other,
Well, that's C's with Buffett, right? Lindt.
yeah.
I'm originally from Kansas City, and so Russell Stover sold for $1.6 billion, probably a decade ago. So
That's
chocolate,
an interesting, yeah.
chocolate's another big one that has anything that has
The Dubai chocolate right now is insane.
ritual to it. There's something about kind of the brand. The bullish guys always talk about basically the remarkability factor. That's another thing because we're all kind of social animals. That your willingness to basically tell others about a product or service because we all kind of kind of crave either the person that tells somebody about a new exciting brand or product or service or this product or services is so good. So, and why that's so important is because otherwise your customer acquisition costs are dramatically decreased if there's word of mouth for bringing something to people versus you having to go out and spend a ton of money on Meta and Google to get customers for yourself or an expensive B2B sales force. That's another thing, just like people's, they found it, it's cool, discovering around kind of products. So I guess back to your question about AI. So like some of it is basically just like maybe doing things that are kind of less impacted by AI and other, kind of other things. So that's the protein shakes and, whatever, the 7 brews and had a chance to participate in the buyout of Insomnia cookies out of
No
Krispy
way.
Kreme donuts. So put a little money
That-
into that. But so there are those sorts of things. And then like the things within, kind of what I call like kind of the B2B software world. One of the things I've invested in is a regulatory software where native or kind of by history, it's called Finalis. And so Finalis will end this year with nearly, I think around about 1,000 investment bankers on its platform. So it's like LPL Financial is for the RIA world. It enables an investment banker to become an investment bank. So it's all the back end. It's all the SEC, the FINRA compliance, and all those sorts of things. And so what that does as a business and a business model is it gives, from an AI standpoint, it gives basically the purest and the cleanest data set because they have a regulatory mandate to basically know what goes in and out of any investment banker's mailbox. So if you think about like kind of where are you going to get proprietary data that's not going to be susceptible to commoditization, that's going to be in scenario like that. So that's why Finalis is super interesting if you can think about what data is truly going to be powerful. And then I do think there's just a lot of things that are going to be like the nichier, the better, where you can really use AI to build something that is incredibly niche, where you know that the workflows within that industry, particularly if that industry is regulated. I think that's a regulation and complexity basically, or code for how do I create margin and defensibility. And I think a lot of these things are going to have profit puddles, not profit pools, where they're just the nichier, the better. I guess there obviously will be some of these huge opportunities, but I think those are going to be largely the domain of the giant LLMs and some of the others. What else do I think about AI? I think
What do you
it's
think?
actually personally, I think it's not so much from who knows. I think the jury is out what it's going to mean in terms of an investment, and particularly investment returns, because there's just so much capital. It sort of reminds me of 25 years ago when, if you may remember, when competitive telecom, in the late 90s was like so highly valued. And if you added up all the value of the CLECs, it was like greater than all the value of the incumbents, or at least, kind of certainly incumbents, right? It's just like one of the sorts of things when you sort of said, gee, just if you play this forward, like it can't work, the math can't work, that they're all going to be that sort of successful. And so I think that it relates to the investment opportunity associated with AI. I think AI may end up being a little bit like China. China was for long periods of time in general has been super high growth for the last 20 whatever number of years since China joined the WTO. But from an investment standpoint, it has not been all that great. So basically the growth and all those sorts of things, and how transformative and the impact on the world economy and all those sorts of things have been terrific. But basically the people that were kind of long China is an investment. Obviously, in certain cases, Alibaba, et cetera, people have done quite well. But I think in general, that maybe won't translate in terms of investment returns, but it's definitely going to translate in terms of just its impact on society. Because I just see some of these companies, some of the things that are AI related that I'm invested in, they just blow you away in terms of
Oh,
what they can do.
there's one that we introduced them to a large retailer, and they have a way to basically make painful memories less painful. And so they ended up using it with their store associates, because a lot of them have had, especially post COVID, or even, right, like, yeah, the associates have not been always particularly nicely treated by the consumers. And so they have like some PTSD. And so it's literally making these unpleasant memories more pleasant, and it's all AI driven. So you start to think about, right, if you can do that, like what else can you do? And you can start going back to see, it all goes back to happiness, Todd. So
Yeah.
you can, right, you can think about it. But like, this is what going back to, I spoke on this panel yesterday at ICSC. It was like AI 101. It was really like 202. But anyways, and I said, think about what you hate doing the most. What is that? And then figure out a way, whether you're using N8N, whatever you're doing for like your workflow, your protocol, and just spend the time, right? Like have AI teach you how to do AI and build in those workflows so you don't have to do that work. Then you get to spend more time doing what you love. I think it'll take down your stress levels. You will be happier. And I keep like a little Microsoft to do, like, what do I really not like to do? And then like on the weekends, let me figure out if there's things that I can spend some time on to figure out a different way to do it, right? Through AI.
Yeah. I was at a VC annual meeting, and they had an investment in a company that I think did like healthcare receivable recovery or something like that, right? And talk about it like a job, which basically would be like one of the worst jobs is like calling people up and asking them to pay their medical bills. I mean, just like a horrible. I mean, just like the stories and how the difficult, just everything about it just seems miserable. But then turn it over to the AI to do it with a voice agent. I can do that. And like, it's crazy. And like,
It's
and the AI can do it, just, I mean, it's fascinating, just all the sorts of jobs and the things have you ever seen basically AI interviews conducted?
we interviewed somebody who wasn't like a real person, it turned out. I mean, we figured it out pretty quickly because we were like our team it was like a group interview, and I'm like, something seems like really off. And so, right, like our head of infrastructure was like, can you just like put your hand in front of your face? And like, it was this, like, we were like interviewing an avatar. And so it's, and so I'll tell you, it's interesting. We've started to like at Coresight, right? We're documenting how we do things, right? That's like at a level we hadn't before. We are, when we're hiring people, right? We're doing like checks, like more checks, just to make sure that, they are who they say they are. And right, these are things that a year ago you wouldn't I think about how rapidly, like how we run our business, what we do, and like how important we now, the HR function for us is one of the like most important. And we have, because who manages the agents, right? We've built a bunch of
Yeah.
agents. Coresight, right? They need a review just like everybody else. And so these are some of the things that you start to think about. And I'm like, I can't, like, while I feel in some ways like, gosh, it's going a lot slower. I thought I could be able to do this, that, and the other now. I'm like, but when you actually look back, you're like as a company, we've changed so much. And I can't even imagine what 26 is going to look like.
I love that. Who manages the agents? And how do you give the agents a review?
I know we've started to do that, and this, and that way too, right? Everybody has a performance review, and then you can start to also think about, right, going back to other work that people, and as I just said internally, right? Like we maybe are not hiring at the same speed we were before because we don't need to, right? Because we're able to do a lot of kind of workflows. Especially, right, like when you're publishing research, right? I mean, there's just a lot of like moving things back and forth. There's, like different workflows, and now everything is kind of like in one workflow.
Yeah.
And so we're saving a lot of time. I think our research, I mean, I've always thought it was good, but I think it's even better. And like, I don't even know, right? We've got now like a fairly large data team because we started to think about where now that we can take a lot of this other stuff off our plate. I'm like, our biggest cost is data. And so we've now started to build most of this internally. I had yesterday when I spoke, this person in front of me was using all government data. And I was like, our data is actually better than a lot of this data that she was using for her talk track. And so I sat down with her afterwards and she was like, this is amazing. And I'm like, and I was explaining to her kind of like how we were building it and whatnot. And we've had some folks who are purchasing our data now. They're like, you're about 6 to 8 weeks ahead of the federal government. And so it's fascinating, but we did it because we just wanted to take down our data cost. That was like the purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think going back to if companies think about what they don't like to do, what they do like to do, and how they can do more of that to drive, we'll call it the happiness quotient or whatever, we'll come up with our own thing, Todd, right? That I think is a really interesting way to think about how you spend your time and to also really easily explain it to your, once again, shareholders, customers, and employees, because I do think right now one of the greatest challenges is change management.
Yeah.
And right, because you've done something the same way for 20 years, to tell me I'm going to save 2 hours a week, so what? I don't really want to learn this whole new workflow. It starts to change how you think about things. All right, so we have five minutes left. So I
Okay,
always
good.
like to end with a lightning round.
Okay, good.
So we didn't, you didn't know this was coming your way, which I think
No.
is probably better. So okay, so let's start. So best decision you ever made?
Gosh, best decision I ever made. Probably actually I had grown up in Kansas City and to move to New York. And that just sort of kind of unlocks so many sort of just kind of opportunities, whether kind of professionally, personally, both in my personal and professional life. So I think that would probably be the answer there. Just kind of coming to you. I think basically, like, if advice to young people is basically get to a major city, get to an opportunity where there's just going to be the most opportunities for basically interaction, people, energy, ideas, et cetera, et cetera.
Worst decision you ever made?
Oh my God, there's so many. Pass.
Yes. Okay. You're absolutely allowed to do that. Favorite candy bar?
By far, Snickers.
Ooh, I like Snickers.
Yeah.
Favorite beverage?
Favorite beverage? Wow. Well, I would say Cabernet Sauvignon, so red wine, but that's probably not the answer. I would say Diet Coke. It's like Charlie Munger basically said Diet Coke was keeping him alive. So I'm gonna stick with Charlie Munger's love for Diet Coke.
I love it. What was the biggest takeaway from your time in banking?
Biggest takeaway from my time in banking. Actually, I think it's an insight that no matter what the company is, basically, as a public company, like the capital is an atheist, and that basically what capital wants is a low volatility growth annuity. And so it doesn't matter what your company does as a company, basically what the signal that the market is looking for is what's the predictability of the stream of cash flows, meaning earnings or whatever it might be. And then, from the annuity standpoint, what's the slope of the line? So how fast is it growing? And just sort of kind of think about that lens. And then also to think about other sorts of lenses in and around, like what makes for a good business.
Favorite pet?
Pet. I had a lot of pets in life. As a child, we had a beagle and a cocker spaniel, and I think I like the cocker spaniel a little bit better. Nobody has a cocker spaniel anymore. Talk about basically a breed that, like, was it was like winning in 1980, and, like, 40 years later is basically like, this Cocker Spaniel just went away. It also goes to basically another thing that I've sort of said about in terms of animals is that we all need to become Labradoodles. And by Labradoodles, I mean, basically you've got to cross yourself with something else. Just a Labrador is a better dog because it's been crossed with a poodle. It's hypoallergenic. It's all those sorts of things. I think just in terms of just all of us from our growth is like, you just got to take yourself and basically cross it with whatever it might be. Whether it may be something, an interest, a geography, a skill, something that just like, that not everybody else sort of kind of has. Because if you're just, I think that's the way to growth, success, differentiation, because we're all kind of a product or service. And so to understand, what that is, I'd say this, we all become Labradoodles. I never had a Labradoodle. I had a Cocker Spaniel. As a child, we had a Beagle named Star. Beagles are hounds. Hounds bark and howl. And
Jeez.
we love that dog.
I didn't know. What do you do for relaxation or downtime? Either how do you spend your time or what helps you kind of have downtime? Because when you love to work as much as you do, I'm sure it's hard.
That's, exercise. So basically I'm a big believer in exercise. I have you said like you gotta exercise, and whether that's even just, kind of going to the gym, as simple as going for actually one of the things I've started to do is to ride a city bike to work. So I can take a city bike kind of through the park and oh my gosh, and take a city bike to work. And I think
14 hours.
that's one of the great things to do.
We had when we spun out of Liam Fung, our CFO at the time got doored, and I guess like somebody opened their door as he was driving down, and he went like,
Yeah.
"Da, da, 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 da." And that always scared me away from I've like literally never even been on one because I was so frightened after that.
Well,
But
I
I
wear
do
a
know,
helmet.
no, smart.
Despite kind of growing up in the era where like my childhood heroes included Evel Knievel, I wear a helmet.
I love it. Favorite book.
Favorite book. This is like one if you're a political candidate, you always say like the Bible, but no. Actually, what book that I thought just a series of books have been, well, I should say basically, my dear friend Scott Galloway's Notes on Being a Man, which is the one that I'm reading right now. But I've also enjoyed a lot. I'm just starting 1929 by Andrew Ross Sorkin,
Nice.
and which I think is just kind of interesting. And then I do think like Morgan Housel's Psychology of Money, Same as Ever, and The Art of Spending are three kind of very interesting books. And I do think like, as an investor, the concept of not what's going to change, but what's not going to change is a really interesting one. And it's a lens to sort of kind of look through. And it's one of the reasons why, kind of personally in my public stock portfolio, I own things like Sherwin-Williams Paint, which has the highest return on invested capital. It's the leader in paint, kind of specialty coatings, as, whatever, 5,000 retail points of distribution. So, I mean, just if you just sort of kind of think about like, I can think 10 years forward about how the world with AI and all those sorts of things. I'm absolutely like, agnostic about like, or, just like I can't predict that long, but I can definitely see 10 years forward and seeing basically people are going to get their paint by going to the local Sherwin-Williams, and that's going to persist.
I love that. How is AI changing your life?
How is AI changing my life? Well, goodness. I think basically in so many ways that are invisible to us. I sense so basically just like so many things that are going on beyond the scene are basically being done by AI, or choices are being made for you by AI, or all these sorts of things sort of kind of passively. So I think the way that AI is mostly impacting my life are in things that I don't really know or appreciate or observe that it's kind of changing my life, and kind of actively how it's changing my life. I use, Google Gemini and Chat GPT and all those sorts of things almost every day now. So, I mean, just from terms of, habit or looking things up and then cross-checking them to make sure that it's not hallucinating and telling me the story and those sorts of things. So like, I guess, I guess that's probably how it's changing my life.
It's funny, like I've always enjoyed like fixing things. I would call myself like a professional tinkerer.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes, right, like I just like to jump in. And so now I find I actually look up how it could be hallucinating or not, but at least I've got a starting point. And so I can fix things faster and better. But I did have a really interesting experience the other day. I was using GPT 5.2, right? Like all these things. And I'm like, literally keep uploading screenshots. I'm like, that does not like exist, right? That is not an option under the message menu. So Gemini was just fine and that worked out really, really well. But it was interesting, right? Like how, and then I started to get frustrated, which is exactly what, I say like AI is supposed to remove frustration, but it was interesting. And I think that we all need to kind of take a pause when we get the information and think about, right, does this seem right or not, as opposed to kind of just jumping right in. That I
Yeah,
think is,
no, it's, you know, you have to like check, double check, and then try to like find. I mean, I think basically citations around like basically like, like what's your source is like going to be, I think going to be something that's going to be super valuable versus just like, because all the rest of it's basically they're always hallucinating because that's their model is to hallucinate, is sort of to guess.
yeah. Well, it's like, it goes back to, it's a large language model. It's just guessing the next best word. So, exactly. All right. So, and number 10, if you can believe we already got there, what is your outlook for 2026?
My outlook for 2026, my goodness, I'm optimistic about 20 in terms of in what in what area? I guess I would say just or in general or what.
I think the markets.
Okay, in terms of the markets. All right. So in terms of the markets, I think the markets are interesting for going to be interesting for 2026. I think you're going to have at some point we're going to have some sort of kind of volatility or drawdown of 10-20% because we almost sort of need to and have to. But look, you've got a consumer which I think is going to start getting checks, right? Or there's going to be a stimulus.
I got one. I got a check. I actually thought it was baloney. It was like, I'm seeing stuff like, I go to like search something on Google and they're like, oh, you get these inflation rebate checks. And I'm like, it's like some avatar. I got a $400 check. I was like, this is like the coolest thing. But I'm like, and it was funny. I mentioned it to an investor who lives down in Miami and they're like, yeah, a bunch of people in New York mentioned this. And I'm like, it was just, first of all, there's no messaging. I was like, not even sure if it was like a hoax or not. Someone else in my household was like, if I don't, they're like, we probably would have not even opened it, would have just like recycled it.
Yeah.
Right? I like open everything. And so I was like, I'm like that it's been so interesting, right? Like no messaging, check shows up, right? You don't like going back to it, it was real because I cashed it. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I think different of anything. Maybe am I buying stuff for the holidays sure, probably. I was like, yeah, maybe I think a little bit differently about where to spend that money because it is found money.
Yeah, no, I think I think like all this like no tax on tips and all the no tax on overtime and some of the rebates and withholding. I think just a lot of Americans that's going to be somewhat stimulative. That'll help the economy, particularly like the more challenged economically kind of demographic segments. I think that'll be good. I think the election will be kind of who knows what the volatility that's going to be introduced there, and who knows what policies are going to come out of Washington, kind of pretty hard to sort of understand. So I think that those are all going to be like the ups and downs of the volatility associated with the year. But I think in general, even some of this, all this AI stuff is going to continue to be very strong, and that's going to be an economic tailwind. So I think we're you'd mentioned kind of the question is, so I think I think earnings and profits and the economy will grow. The question is basically, does that grow faster than the multiple contracts, because multiples are relatively high here. Like you have you mentioned, I don't know if it was here or the preamble to this, basically what a great company Costco is. Kind of Costco has been something whose multiple is like doubled from 25 to 50 in the last number of years, and has come down a little bit because Costco's had a kind of a sideways year as a stock. Like Costco still has a very elevated PE. I mean, Costco's PE is, I don't know, you would know better than I because you're closest than I am, but it's like 40 or 45, somewhere in there. And that's a big number, for a company that basically grows 8%.
It's a subscription. At the end of the day, it's a subscription company, right? I mean, they make the bulk of their money on their membership. Yeah. So it is a subscription-based business. So I wouldn't put it under SaaS, but that I think is what's interesting when you still really think about the business they're in. No,
that's exactly the business they're in. That's why the market re-rated it, just as Apple. Apple's in basically that kind of business too. That's why Apple's, it's the return on invested capital is so high. And it's got such a great business model. That's why, Apple got re-rated by the market, why its top line has not grown that fast in a number of years, but its multiple has increased so much because it's moved more to services. And so that's why it's done so well.
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating. Well, Todd, I could talk to you for hours, which is what makes you so special. And I always learn so much. Yeah, I appreciate that. But I think we'll have to have you on again because I still don't feel like I really unwrapped, and I apologize to the audience, what it is that you do that puts you in a position either physically or otherwise to really cut through all the noise, because it really is such a gift that you have. And I know you're also so willing to kind of share, whether it's mentorship or insights with others. And so I think we have to have that conversation to kind of get inside Todd's head. And we really appreciate it. Happy holidays, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much, too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. And thank you for joining us this week. Coresight Research serves our members with leadership communities, data resources, events, strategy sprints, proprietary research, and more. Visit us at Coresight.com to learn how joining our community can accelerate your success. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week.